After implementing enterprise voice, your organization may choose to use the Lync client as a soft phone, or you may need to go with some kind of desk phones. Now, the one I'm looking at here on Amazon is a Plantronics USB desk phone. Essentially, you just take this phone, plug it in via USB to your desktop, and this device will piggyback off your existing Lync connection and get you signed in. So calls you make through this physical device go through the machine. You'll get your presence indicator here, and the phone will work just like a traditional desk phone, but it would require you to be signed in. Now, another option would be to go with something like this, a Polycom CX600 IP phone. So this type of phone is a little bit more robust. It runs Windows CE embedded operating system. It actually has a Lync client installed on it, and it actually has a physical Ethernet port on the back side of the phone here. So this phone does support tethering USB connections as well, so you can authenticate through your sign-in on your Lync client through the desktop, get connected, and then once you're connected from there, the phone would pull its options through DHCP. So in order to use a phone like this that has its own Ethernet port, you need to configure some DHCP options. And this can be a little bit tricky. So let's take a look at the process here. I'm actually sitting on the DHCP server right now. And if you look under my IP version 4 settings, I have a single scope set up out here. And for my server options, I have a couple things. I'm handing out DNS server settings, but I'm also handing out options 004 and 042. So this is handing out time server and NTP server information to end users, and really the main thing we're concerned about is desk phones. We want to make sure the phones have their clocks synced with your Active Directory domain controllers, and the NTP server is a way for you to do that. In addition, you need to add a bunch of options so the phones can figure out which front-end pool to register with and the certificate provisioning service that needs to be contacted when signing in. So the way that the desk phones work is you initially sign in using PIN authentication or USB tethering. And once you've authenticated, you download a certificate from one of the front-end servers. From then on out, for the next 6 months or so, you use certificate authentication when connecting to the front-end server. Now, you can manually configure all of these options, but the Lync server team built a utility that's on your Lync servers that you can copy over to your DHCP server and set this up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run out to Lync 1 on the C drive. Under Program Files, Common Files, Microsoft Lync Server 2010. I'm going to copy these two files here, DHCP config script and DHCP util. So I'm going to copy those over locally here on my C drive. I'll just put them in their own folder, call it Lync DHCP. And from there, I'm going to open up a command prompt. I'll switch into this folder. Let's get the screen cleaned up here. All right, so at this point, what I want to do is do a DHCP util and say SIP server and type in my front-end pool information. Essentially, what this is doing is just showing me the information that needs to be added in DHCP options. As you can see here, well, this is what will be handed to the phone. So the SIP server FQDN will be pulled at interface-ttlabs.com. The certificate provisioning service, this URL here on the front end pool, needs to be handed to the phone. And essentially what they're saying here is option 120 corresponds to the SIP server FQDN. And then option 43 is a bunch of sub options where we have a UC identifier, a URL scheme, which would be HTTPS, a web server FQDN, which would be your front end pool. So it's basically taking this information and converting it into all of these options. Now, fortunately, that DHCP config script will take this information and configure the options for you. And that's really the way to go, because this can be kind of tricky getting this all to work. So the way that you would do that here is, let me clean this screen up a bit. What I'd want to do is a DHCP util, a SIP server, pool.interface-ttlabs.com in this case. Web server is the same thing. And then I want to add another parameter that says run config script. And what this is going to do is it's going to execute a batch file, the one that I copied over into this Lync DHCP folder, and they'll add all of those options for me using the netsh utility. So once that runs, what you'll want to do is you'll need to schedule an outage probably and restart the DHCP services. So if you just go up to all tasks, do a restart here, and then what you should end up with is all of your options here. So you can see that that utility added in all of these various options we need for those desk phones to successfully pull an IP address and pull the configuration information. Unfortunately, there's no way to manually go to a Lync phone via a web URL, specifically anything running like the Lync client. like the Polycom CX600. There's no way to hit that thing via a browser and configure these options. But if we take a look at these, the UC identifier is MSUC client, URL scheme is HTTPS. You can see that for web server FQDN, this is the actual value in ASCII here in the binary representation that's actually getting handed out. So really all just that information that was pulled from the utility. So at this point, let me move over to a machine off the DHCP server that has Silverlight installed. So we'll go into the control panel and configure a couple options. Now, one thing I do want to point out in the link management shell before we get into setting up users is there is a commandlet out there called set CS registrar configuration. And you can do something that looks like this, where you do a -enable DHCP server $true. So on a small network where you just have one VLAN or one network segment, you can enable this DHCP server options. So the idea might be that you already have maybe a router or some other Linux box or something like that handing out IP addresses for DHCP. But what the server can do is listen for all of those additional options. So the MSUC client configuration. So what is the SIP server registrar? What's the location of the certificate provisioning service? All that can be handed out through Lync if you enable this option. So for small deployments, that might be useful. But let's take a look at what we need to do for users to allow them to do that initial PIN authentication on phones. So I'm going to go to users here, do a find. And I'm going to take Alberto Cole. He's already set up for enterprise voice. But remember, when we went through here, I actually set him up with an extension. So you can see here that his extension is 1003. So I've defined his phone number in E164 format, and I've tacked on this ext equals and then the extension. So the extension would act as a username. So when he would be first setting up his phone, he could use this as a username. We're going to give him a PIN number that would act as a password. So we can do that first authentication, get that certificate from the certificate provisioning service on the front end pool, and then from there, authenticate using certificate authentication. So he's already got a PIN number, or he's already got an extension, so we're good there. And what I want to do here is have his name highlighted, go up to action, and then I'm going to do a set PIN. So from here, I can have the server automatically generate a PIN, but I'm going to manually enter one here. So I'm going to do 9876 as the PIN. And notice that it's saying PIN must be greater than a minimum of 5. So basically what it's saying here is we have some policies set up right now that don't allow a 4-digit PIN. So let's take a look at that real quick. So I'm going to go over here to conferencing. This is kind of in a weird spot because these PIN numbers are also used for dial-in conferencing, which we're also going to look at later. But I'm going to come over here to PIN policy. Notice that by default, we have a minimum of 5 for PIN. So I'm going to come in here and configure that. I'm going to make that a 4. You can specify things like maximum logon attempts, PIN expiration. I'm going to go ahead and allow common patterns so people can use a real basic PIN number if they want to. I'm going to leave PIN history count at 0. I'm just going to go with this, commit it. Now let me try to go back over to his account and set a 4-digit PIN. So Alberto Cole, go to action, set PIN, 9876, say OK. And we're good to go. So notice here it says that the PIN has been successfully set up, and now you can open up an email application and send the PIN to a new user. You could also do this in PowerShell if you needed to do it in bulk, set the PIN for multiple users and fire them off an email all in one shot, if you need to do this for many users at once. But now that Alberto's set up, let's go through the process on a desk phone of actually signing in with PIN authentication and getting our phone configured and fully functional. Okay, so here's my Polycom CX600. I'm gonna get ready to configure it. It's never been set up before, so this is the first time. It is plugged into the network, and it's pulling an IP address and all the other information through my DHCP server that's been configured with the DHCP util. So let me go ahead and get started here. Press this button here. I'm going to select English. And it says, before you can use this phone, you will be guided through a short setup process. It's asking, do you have a computer available to set this up? So can you tether this thing with USB and then use your Lync credentials that you're signed in with on the PC to initially set up the phone? So I'm going to say no. So I'm going to have to configure this completely through DHCP. So I don't have the USB cable on me. So that's going to ask my extension. So my extension for Alberto is 1003, and hit next. My PIN number was 9876. And I'm going to go ahead and attempt to sign in. Okay, and after just a few seconds, we've automatically been completely set up. We authenticated, everything looks good, so it knows now that we're signed in as Alberto Cole. I'm gonna go ahead and hit next here and finish off the configuration. I'm actually in the Arizona time zone, select that, hit next. I'm gonna choose a date format, should go with the defaults, and a 12-hour clock. And finally, I'll have a choice to pick a ringtone. That one will work for me. So we'll hit next, and now we're done. So go ahead and hit done, and then you'll see that we are now signed in. So as you can see, we have a fully configured phone. We even have a status indicator here for our presence. That's the overall process of setting up these desk phones and getting them set up through DHCP and authenticating with PIN authentication.